So very briefly, Diane is a successful entrepreneur, marketer, author, and active angel investor. She sits on numerous public, private, and no-profit boards. She's the former CEO of Startup Institute, which is dedicated to helping people transform their careers and their jobs and find jobs they love. Through their programs, people gain the skills, mindset, and network to succeed in the startup world, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And she's also chairman of C-Space or Communispace, formerly Communispace, right? The leader in helping companies achieve customer-inspired growth, where she was CEO for 13 years, driving its exponential growth over 600 employees and offices over 12 countries. She's co-author of the book Customer-Centered Growth, 5 Strategies for Building Competitive Advantage, a Business Week bestseller published in 11 languages. So we're very happy to have you tonight, and please join me in welcoming her tonight. So thank you. It's common practice at Startup Grind to start asking our guests a little bit about their background, where are you from, and how you got started with this bug of entrepreneurship, where you went to high school or college, and those initial first experiences that motivated you to be in this area.
Sure. Hi, everybody. You know, no one ever sits in the front row. Do you know that? This is a scientific experiment. What? Well, you know, people sit in the back because they worry that I'm going to be boring. So if I am, you can just get out, right? You can just like pretend you're going to the restroom or whatever and then not come back. Oh, look at that. Go, Kenneth.
Gentleman in the room.
Now you're stuck, though.
I forgot I had this name tag, so when you said my name, I was like, whoa.
Whoa, she's amazing. So I was actually just talking to somebody about this, but you know, growing up, I never really knew what I wanted to do. I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, and certainly for the first 20 years of my life, I had lots and lots of people helping me. And so I knew that I wanted to be successful largely so that I could kind of give back. But I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I had the misfortune of having a younger brother who got a gift on his second birthday from my parents, which is one of those plastic black doctor kits. And he opened it up, we opened it up for him, and inside was a stethoscope, and he put it around his neck, and he was done. My brother, at 2 years old, decided he wanted to be a doctor. He ended up being great in science. He went to med school, he became a surgeon, and he spent the past 35 years absolutely loving what he does. And you know, it's interesting because I don't think he ever had one moment when he said, I wonder what I ought to do next. I wonder about the road not taken. I wonder, you know, what else I might be doing with my life or whatever. I mean, he was just completely clear about everything that he wanted to do. And I hated him for that because I'm the opposite. You know, I was the person who, in college, like 5 minutes before the deadline of when you could declare your major, I was in there going, I still don't know what to pick. And I've always kind of been like that. And I think most, as I've learned over the years, most people are like that. That we kind of play things by ear. You get a job, you notice some things, you tuck them away. You do something else, you know, you try it out. And I actually have come to love being like that because I think that life becomes more interesting. You know, it's all about serendipity. So, like, has anybody seen that Gwyneth Paltrow movie, Sliding Doors? Yeah, I mean, I love that movie. So, Gwyneth Paltrow, she's living in London. The movie opens. I'm going to mess this up a little, but I'll give you the general idea. The movie opens. She is running to the subway. Run, run, run. The door is about to close. She goes flying into the subway, sits down next to this really cute guy, and then you see what's going on with her life. And 15 minutes into the movie, it starts all over again. And she's run, 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 and the doors close, and she doesn't make it onto the subway. And you see what happens to her life and how different everything is just because of that one moment. And I think that's super cool. Because if you believe that story, that one moment can change everything, then life's more interesting because you wake up in the morning and you go, well, who knows? Like today could be the day when I meet somebody at a networking event or I sit next to somebody on the T or whatever that just kind of changes everything. And that's really been, so it's not like I had this grand plan. I got out of business school and I got a job working at General Foods, which at the time was one of the great consumer packaged goods companies, which was eventually bought by Kraft. And I went there because I really liked marketing and because I had an offer from Procter & Gamble and didn't want to live in Cincinnati. That was like about as much as, and I had to start paying off all my loans. And they asked me what kind of product I wanted to work on. And of course, I didn't know. So I said, well, I don't know, I'll work on anything. Just give me something that I can understand. Like, I don't want to work on decaffeinated coffee because why? I don't understand why anybody would drink decaf. Like, why would you drink something that tasted bad that doesn't keep you awake? I just don't get that. Of course, they put me as I became a brand manager on Brim decaffeinated coffee, otherwise known as Fill It to the Rim with Brim. And it was really wonderful. I mean, I learned so much about it. It was so valuable to, and I fell in love with consumers and research and everything because I realized how valuable it was to have no assumptions and to have no understanding of your customer, and the value of just being completely curious about who was going to end up buying your product. I had an excuse to go back to Boston called a guy. And so I left General Foods. And on my last day, everybody had a party for me. And there were about this many people in the room, and we were all sitting around, and we were kind of talking to each other. And I was sitting like over there, like, what's your name? Ash? I was sitting where Ash is. Everybody goes, speech, speech, speech. So I get up from my chair and I come to the front of the room to tell everybody how much I've enjoyed working with them. And at that moment, the guy who was going to take my job comes walking into the room, and he went and sat in my chair. And I thought, shit, they're not going to miss me. Like, here, I thought I was really making a difference. And it was about 3 seconds before some super capable person came in and sat in my seat. And I didn't go, oh, that's it, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. But I did kind of tuck that in the back of my mind, because what many of us really want, and of course, if you work in small companies, you just get that all the time, is you want to wake up in the morning and say, I don't know what they'd do without me. And so I tucked that in the back of my mind, moved to Boston, got a job at Gillette, which was the best consumer packaged goods company to work for at the time in this area. I was about to start. The guy who hired me called me and he said, you know, would you be willing to come in? I know you haven't started yet, but the category manager, like the head of the whole personal care division, would like to meet you. I said, sure. I walk over. Gillette was on Huntington Avenue at the time. I walk in, and I had this great conversation with this senior executive. And at the end, he said to me, so what trepidations do you have about taking the job? I remember the word trepidations. And I said, well, you know, none other than the usual in consumer packaged goods. And he, you know, what's that? And I said, well, you know, marketing soft and dry deodorant 60 hours a week isn't exactly the Peace Corps. But other than that, I'm psyched. Well, he did not think that was funny, and he freaked out, and he started screaming and yelling at me, and he withdrew the job offer. I mean, he just said, if you can't get excited about the deodorant business, you don't belong here. So I cried, which is what all professional women do in these situations. And I left, and you know, I became a consultant, which is what you do when you're fired. And so beat that. If you've been fired before, I was fired before I even started the job. But again, you take that experience, you tuck it in the back of your mind and say, well, I don't really need to work for the Peace Corps, but that experience just taught me that I really wanted to feel like what I was doing mattered, that I had an opportunity to make a dent in the universe. So I could go on with, you know, all of the rest of my career, but over the years, I just started taking little things about my jobs, and I just started thinking, you know, I worked at another company where I was really happy. It was in the corporate training business. I was one of the early employees, and I had great bosses and horrible bosses. And while I was there, for a while, the culture was great. And then for a while, the culture was horrible. And I just kept thinking, oh my gosh, like I could create a better company. I used to sit in the cafeteria with my friends and I'd go, you know, it would be great, Carlos. I mean, let's just, you know, wouldn't it be fun to just, the two of us, we could go and create our own company and we could bring Ash with us. You know, like all the people who we love and build the kind of company that we always wanted to work in, like no jerks. And my friends would say, you know, Diane, if you ever decide to do that, let me know. Like they didn't have my dream, but they thought, you know, it would be fun to work together. And meanwhile, I was like obsessing over that. And when I started,
was it having an impact and owning the culture, creating your own culture? What drove that?
You know, I just had this vision of working in a super cool company and building something that was a great culture, that had a bunch of amazing employees who loved what they were doing. I mean, I'd like watch detective shows on TV. You know, the detective would go walk into the lobby and stop at the receptionist and ask for somebody, and I'd think, ooh, I like that lobby. Like maybe the company, I mean, I literally started obsessing over it. And the reason I'm telling you all that is that I did not initially become an entrepreneur because I had some amazing idea. But I did become an entrepreneur because I just got obsessed with the idea of building a great company that I loved working in. And for me, I started learning that success for me was doing what I love with people I love. And that's what I wanted to do. It's all I started thinking about. And fortunately, when that became very clear to me, it was the turn of the century. It was early 2000. The internet was finally becoming commercialized. Everybody was talking about content commerce community. You all know what content and commerce are. I mean, community was so fascinating to me. And the interesting thing is, if you're in this room, no matter what age you are, if you grew up in the US, all of our first experience with community was the same, which is that we had an AOL account. And the first time I was sitting in a chat room going, this is unbelievable. Like, why am I even talking to this person? I never even met them before, right? Remember like chat rooms, or you'd have AIM or any of that stuff? I just was so fascinated by that. I fell in love with that. And I thought, you know, I bet that this whole idea of what we're doing and conversation could have really serious application to businesses for serious purposes, that employees will need to speak to each other also and have these kinds of conversations. And that was the beginning of Communispace.
So was the use of those tools that inspired you you saw the value on that social experience? How did it become a business idea? How was it talking to somebody else? You started skimming it yourself? How did it came to be the company that started?
Yeah. You know, I always have 1,000 ideas. So the idea was never the thing. Like sometimes people will say to me, for those of you who are entrepreneurs, sometimes people will say to me, Diane, I'd like to be an entrepreneur. I just don't have the idea yet. And it's like, I'll give you 5. Like I have so many ideas. And I say to people, just think of something that drives you crazy. If it's a personal thing, fixing it becomes a B2C business. And if it's something that's happening in your organization, fixing it is a B2B business. And there are a zillion things that drive us all crazy that no one has fixed. Of course, and I grew up with the Jetsons. So they still haven't done most of what the Jetsons could do in that cartoon. Like she'd come home and push a button and say steak, and out would come the steak. That still hasn't happened, although we're getting close. So I loved community, and I thought, you know, companies will need this because there are so many problems with communication and sharing and giving advice within companies. And so the original idea for Communispace was really about creating these online communities so that people within companies could collaborate with each other. So one of our first clients I started the company. I found a software engineer. The two of us sat, we were writing code, and I was the product person, and we had a couple of my friends, a couple of other people join us, but we were trying to build a product that would allow people who were globally distributed in a company to actually help each other and share advice and collaborate. So I was playing the product person. I had a software guy, and he put together a prototype, and I just said to him, I'm going to go out and see if I can sell this to somebody. He's like, don't sell, it's just a prototype. I said, well, I'll tell people it's a prototype. And the first client that we had was Chase Manhattan Bank, which is now JP Morgan Chase. They wanted to build a community so that all of their HR people, they had 200 HR people all over the world. And those people physically came together, came to Wall Street once every 2 years. And they spent 3 days together, like talking about whatever HR people talk about, right? They were sharing ideas like, you know, how do you do your performance management system and compensation, talking about vendors and everything. And what we were going to do through the magic of the internet was to create the equivalent of, you know, a collaborative space for them so that when they weren't physically together, they could help each other. The client buys this thing. They pay us $50,000, and we start building this thing so that we can sell it to them. I go down to Wall Street. Everybody is there together. I was the final speaker. And the head of the division goes, okay, everybody, you're going to hear something absolutely amazing. And I tell them we're going to create the Chase Manhattan Bank HR network. We put the screenshot on the slides, and the whole room stands up and gives us a standing ovation. I mean, they're literally cheering. It looks like the way the Democratic convention is like last night. Woo! They're like screaming. We were so excited. We got on the train back to Boston. We're like high-fiving each other. And we sold a couple others like that. And based on just a couple of sales, we raised $10 million in venture capital, like welcome to the year 2000. And once we raised that money, I called Ash. I called Kenneth. I called my friends. I said, quit your jobs. This is it, man. We're doing it. And they quit their jobs. And they came, and it was really great. As the year 2000 went on, we had one big problem, which is that we launched the Chase HR community, for instance, and there were 200 members of that network. And at the end of the first week, only 7 came in. And I could tell this in a much more dramatic way, but basically, we tried everything. Week 2, we got 8 people. Week 3, we were back down to 7. We couldn't get anybody to use this software. So here, how interesting, right? We got this big community thing happening in the world. I have this idea. I think it's going to work. Everybody loves it. The client spends $50,000 with a company that's never done a thing before, because it's such a big need for these people to be able to connect. They're giving us a standing ovation, and they're not coming in. We had all kinds of excuses. We tried everything. And we just couldn't get anybody. We couldn't make it mission critical for people. Like they wanted to, but they just didn't have the time, didn't have the bandwidth, and we had a lucky day. I was in Kansas City with my friend, the equivalent of Ash, this great salesperson. He had sold business to Hallmark, and the card company, and there we are. We're sitting with this guy named Tom Brailsford, who had bought a community so that all of Hallmark store managers could connect with each other. And he looked at me in the middle of the meeting, and he said to me, you know, Diane, I love what you guys are doing, but I'm just worried that no one's going to come into the community. None of this is all gold crown store managers who are going to share ideas with each other. So I think this was kind of a sliding door today. He says, I'm worried they're not going to come in. I said to him, you know, Tom, I'm worried they're not going to come in also. It's totally quiet in the room. Mitchell, my friend who sold the account, he's like kicking me under the table, like, what have you done? And Tom Brailsford says to me, you know, I think I have an idea. Like, I think I have an idea that might be better than what you're currently doing. He said, you know, think about it. We're a card company. Like, we're probably screwed. I mean, it's 2000. Maybe people won't send cards anymore. He said, so I don't know. He said, we have a real innovation problem. How are we going to grow moving forward? He said, You know, our target market is moms. What if we put moms in here instead of store managers? And they could kind of give us advice. Like we could have a community of moms, we could run ideas by them. They could tell us about their lives, blah. He said, I don't know, just what do you think about that? I actually thought it was a great idea. We went back to Boston. I told everybody we weren't doing the Hallmark Gold Crown store manager community. In November of 2000, we launched the Hallmark Idea Exchange for Parents, which was an online community of 197 moms and 3 stay-at-home dads who agreed to be advisors to Hallmark and help them grow and innovate into the future. At the time, the software was kind of primitive. We had some discussion functionality. We had some survey stuff. We had some instant messaging. By the end of the first day, 82 of the 200 moms had come into the community. By the end of the week, they had all been in there. The moms are going crazy. They cannot believe that Hallmark wants to hear what they think. The client at Hallmark is calling me like 3 times a day. Did you see what that person said? Did you see what that person said? Did you see what that person said? It was miraculous. And I pulled 5 people off of their jobs. We called them the Customer Community SWAT team. And their charter was they had 45 days to just kind of say, what is this? Does anybody else do it? What do we have to do differently to the software? How do we make this work? Who buys it? What do they need? Blah, blah, blah.
That's really interesting. So it's, in a way, it was kind of an organic pivot from going from a community collaborative tool to a market research tool.
Yeah.
How did that change the nature of the business? How did you, was it an easy transition, or did you have to change a lot of what you were doing? Was it just as easy as to change the tool itself?
Yeah. We didn't do a lot differently to the software. The biggest thing that happened is that 4 days after we presented to the board, they all said, yeah, pivot into this space. And 4 days later, the internet bubble burst. So it was the worst time in my professional life to have a good idea. I mean, even if it was a good idea, if you remember early 2001, February, March, it's like everything was fine. And then abruptly, it all just fell apart. We were in Watertown at the time, and I remember there were just moving vans all over the place. I mean, companies were just closing down. So the problem that we had was we had a great idea at a time when no companies were going to buy from us. And basically, the employees saved the company. We would have run out of money, but all of the employees agreed to take a significant pay cut in return for stock options on the condition that we would keep going and not lay anybody off. And I mean, 2001 was just awful, mostly because of external factors. We had a new thing, but we had a terrible economy. Then September 11th happened. We eked by. Our investors at the 11th hour gave us a little bit more money. And then the other thing that happened that really helped is that by the summer of 2002, the economy got better. So unlike what's been happening over the past 8 years or so, where things have been fairly anemic and then a little better but slower growth, it kind of went, it was awful, and then things just got a lot better, and that really helped us. But it was hard for the first 4 years. We had a massive case of employee fraud, one of our salespeople forging contracts, and at that time we thought we were a $2.5 million company. We were actually a $1.5 million company. I mean, it was full of a lot of drama. Our first 4 years could have been a made-for-TV movie, but we figured it out.
So how did you then grew to the success it is now? How did you leverage the value of communities? There's a bit of a story of growth. You sold the company around 2010, so a little bit of that path from that moment that it started picking up again to where the company is now.
Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know how many of you are in B2B businesses, but you know, in a B2B business, everything is about finding great clients. It really is. By the time we did this Hallmark thing, so first of all, finding your first client is the hardest. We got really lucky because Tom Brailsford loved what we were doing so much. If you Google it, I think you can still find it. There's an article in Business Week, which people used to read a lot. Business Week was a great thing to be in like 2002. There was a full-page article about us in 2002. The only client we had was Hallmark, and Tom made it sound like we were like the greatest enterprise software company in the entire world. So early clients, and we had a lot of people who didn't like what we were doing. We were kind of disruptive to focus groups and some other things. So, but Tom would come to conferences with me, and he'd talk about how excited he was, and then we'd pick up some other clients. And my friend Patty, who's in the polka dot dress there in the back of the room, actually is not there anymore, but Patty was a client at Unilever who was an early client. And, we'd go to people and they'd go, I don't like this thing. Nobody's on the internet. We do like internet penetration charts. And they'd say, it's not a representative sample if someone's on the internet because people aren't on it yet. I mean, it was just such a different time. But we had like 5 clients who said, oh, what the hell? I'll give it a shot. Who just thought it would be really, really fun to go on an adventure. And in B2B, if you've got, well, in any business, if you have a critical mass of customers, you can, and they're happy, you're done. You can take that business and replicate that, and you've got enough people to keep going. Now, in a B2C business, the numbers that you need for critical mass have lots of zeros behind them. In most B2B businesses, you have 5 really happy clients with big brand names. You are like ready to go. So the strategy that worked was just to find really, really great brands and make them super happy. And they became our reference base. They became people who went to conferences with us and talked to the press and gave their friends advice when they were starting out with us. And that really helped. It helped us because we needed to raise more money. We weren't profitable. And so when our investors saw that we had super happy clients who were renewing their contracts, that made a big difference. And then after a while, it just all came together. I mean, it was one big, in business, there are a lot of biological metaphors about organic growth and all that. It's not biology, it's physics. I mean, everything is about momentum and critical mass and vectors and everything. And at some point, it just all came together after all of the trouble. And we had enough people telling enough other people. And we put together a model, that just kind of made it work. There were lots of challenges along the way. We had a very big decision to make as to whether to be just software or also to add a layer of services. Our investors didn't want us to add any services. They thought that was a way to, make it more difficult to scale. But we had a client base that really made it clear that they didn't have any time to figure out how to use our technology and how to work it on a day-to-day basis. So we created a whole set of services and, kind of layered all of that in. Eventually another growth engine was just figuring out how to be more global and all of that. So kind of every 2 years we had to reinvent the business.
And so you're still on the board, right? You're still
I'm
chairman,
yeah.
But at some point you left the day-to-day operations. How was that like? When did you decide, okay, it's time for me to leave? Or how was that story of you deciding to let go?
We had gotten to the point where everything was working. I had a great leadership team. I guess the last, going global was really fun. We bought a company in London. We bought a company in China. We were in a lot of countries. We had about 600 people. I had this great leadership team. And I think I just started doing the math. I thought, oh my gosh, I've been with this company for 13, 14 years. I wonder if I have another thing in me. Like, am I going to die in this conference room, sitting here, doing this community stuff, helping big brands get more inspiration from their customers? And I loved the business, but I just had this little voice saying, come on, Diane, do something new. And I had a great leadership team. I had 7 people reporting to me, 3 of whom I thought could run the company. And so I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to leave like for clients, for employees. And then I came up with this brilliant idea, which I could call myself chairman, even though we had actually already sold the company. So I didn't have a board, but chairman was a good title. It was a way for me to send a signal that says, I'm still connected, but I'm not going to run the company anymore. So in the summer of 2014, 2 years ago, I left. And
Did you know what you were going to do next, or?
no, I mean, I didn't know what I was going to do next. I left. Boston's a small town. I had been around for a while. They put it in the paper. My phone started ringing. People started saying, Diane, you should be a VC. I thought that would be like the worst thing in the world for me because I'm a terrible investor. I fall in love with every idea. I would be like totally losing money working for a venture capital firm. I looked at a lot of different things, and there was one company that I was kind of interested in. The VC had called me in, said I should run this, and I decided I wasn't going to do that one. I met with a friend of mine, and he said, I get why you're not doing that. He said, by the way, do you know Startup Institute's looking for a CEO? And I said, oh, you're kidding. That's so cool. And here, I knew about Startup Institute, which I'll explain in a sec, but I knew about it because when Startup Institute first started running classes, we gave them free space at Communispace. So I used to stick my head in, say hi to the students, do a couple of classes and all that. And so I met with the Startup Institute people. And just to give you the quick elevator speech, Startup Institute was founded in Boston. It's now in multiple cities. But what we're known for is this boot camp that takes people who are basically unhappy in their work. And in about 8 weeks, we give them the skills and the network to be able to get jobs they love, mostly in tech, mostly in growth companies. And these companies are desperate to get talent because there's a big talent gap out there. And these people are desperate to get jobs they love. And we have this unbelievable program. So the idea was they needed somebody to come in for adult supervision. And they wanted to take what was a great idea and turn it into a business. I talked to them and everything. And then I just decided it was too early. So I turned the job down. I just wasn't sure. And I moved on, just started looking at other things. And about a month later, I was having a drink with a friend of mine named Sherry Oberg, and Sherry was a biotech executive, and she had just sold her company. And I said, well, Sherry, what are you going to do now? She says, I don't know, but I'm really interested in the education space. I said, oh, really? Tell me more. I said, I have a job for you. You should take this Startup Institute job. She goes, well, what's that? And I start telling her all about it. She's sitting in the bar. She's getting all excited. At the end of the conversation, she says, would you introduce me to everybody? I said, I'd be happy to. I'm going to do it right when I go home. So I get into my car, and I'm driving home, and I start thinking to myself, I'll be damned if I'm going to let Sherry Oberg run that company. So I thought, oh my gosh, she's going to kill me. So I get home, I called her, and I said, you're going to hate me, but I think this was a really important conversation. I think I really do want that job. She thought it was hilarious. A lot of my girlfriends say, you can also do the translation, but my girlfriends say it's like if you go out with a guy and he wants a commitment and you go, then some other cute guy walks by and you go, I don't know, I'm not ready for a commitment. So you say no, and then you see this guy with some other woman and all of a sudden you want to go out with him. It was that kind of thing. So men, you can just flip it around, you know what I mean? But I think that is it, right? I just started thinking about somebody else running that company, and I thought, no, I want to do that. So it was totally emotional. And so in October of 2014, I did another startup.
Great. So how was that like? You come into a new company, has a culture already. What was your vision? And tell a little bit of everybody about the growth that it has had also as well. And
You know,
You're-
it's interesting there's a lot of insight in that question because it does have a culture already. It did have success already. And so it's totally different because when you're the founder, like at Communispace, which I still call Communispace, I knew more about the company than anybody. I knew all the employees. I knew everything, and I had shaped the culture. Because the fun thing about being a CEO is you get to be the chief culture officer. I mean, everything good and everything horrible about C-Space was basically the same thing as everything good and horrible about me. And and then I come into this company. I know none of the people. I know less about the company than anybody else. So I'm still the CEO, but it is completely different. And I got super intimidated by that. I mean, I bought this book. Have you ever heard of this book called The First 90 Days? I mean, I literally was like, here I am. I've been a CEO for 15 years. I had been a senior executive for like 20 years before that. I've managed thousands of people. You know, we did really well with Communispace. We sold it for, 9 figures and all that. And here I am reading a book like about how to lead a 20-person company. So I read the first 90 days and I think, I can do this in 60 days. So I go into the first day. I have a meeting with the staff. Some of the people are in other cities on the phone. And I just said, look, I need to learn. I know less about this than any of you. I said, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take 60 days and I'm just going to listen. That's what the book said to do. I'm going to talk to students, partners, instructors, all of you, all the communities and everything. And then at the end of the 60 days, I'm going to pull all that together and let you know what our priorities are going to be. Everybody says, that sounds really great. So 6 days in, I'm done. I kind of got my mojo back. I thought, okay, I know why they brought me in. It was pretty clear to me what we needed to do. There was so much that was already good about the company. And it was most of the issues were just saying, well, wait a minute, how do we turn this into something that's growing, where the numbers look better? How do we think differently about quality? How do I make sure we bring in the right kind of leadership team? I knew it was all this kind of stuff that I had done in the past and probably many of you have done before also. So I did that, and it's been, it's a very, very, working in education is a really, really inspirational thing to do. So here's my 60 seconds on the education business. We have this model in the US. Here's what your life is like. You're born, you go to school for 20 years, and then you're done. And then you take what you learned in school, and you apply that for the rest of your life. And that model, I am positive that model is dead. I'm positive that model is dead because the world is changing too fast. If you believe that model, you do sit around in your 30s blaming all of your career problems on your college, which didn't train you for a job and didn't give you the skills that you need for a job. And, you kind of become the victim. But, the world is changing so fast now that I believe that 5 years out of college, the large proportion of what you knew 5 years before is obsolete. And so what has to happen is we have to have a model of learning throughout our lives. And I think there's huge opportunity in the adult learning space. When you think about building a company and solving big problems, there's so many. In education, there's lots of activity in K through 12, just thinking about how to completely reinvent the educational experience, especially using technology for our kids. And I think that's a great thing to do. But after having gone through Startup Institute and seeing amazing people and how quickly they can learn web development, web design, technical marketing, sales, how quickly they can pick up skills and make complete career transformations, I just think that education is going to change. Like now, lifelong learning, for the most part, especially if you don't live in our community, people think lifelong learning, it's like, well, when you're 60, you take an Italian course. I mean, it's really very primitive, but I think all of us will, will be in jobs where we don't have the skill we need, and we have to learn how to learn. Now, sometimes you'll learn by just Googling something, or sometimes you just get online, you take a free Code Academy course and, up your skills. Sometimes you say, well, I really need to do something, so I'm going to General Assembly on a Saturday afternoon, I'm going to do a seminar. And sometimes you have to just say, I've lost it, right? I need to do time out. This happens with a lot of marketing people, and I can relate to that because marketing is completely changed. And sometimes you just have to say, I'm taking a time out, I'm going to go to a boot camp, I'm going to transform my skill set, learn what you need to know in 2016, and then all of a sudden apply that somewhere else. So I think every single one of us, 5 years from now, everybody will be stopping and going to boot camps. Everybody will be stopping and saying, you'll be constantly in that mode because things are changing so fast.
I think that's really interesting what you're talking about, and it seems like the program was relying on very particular lines of skills and learning: marketing, web development, sales. But I wonder, there's a dimension of that is also soft skills, because there's I don't know, I'm guessing collaboration is one, but can you talk about that? What people also need to have as attitudes, or as what else in terms of soft skills is needed to be able to change as fast as the industries are changing?
Yeah, so the Startup Institute curriculum now is 2/3 hard skills. So you pick one of those 4 tracks and you learn that. The other third of what people get at Startup Institute is soft skills, career development, networking, all of that. And it's very interesting because people always say, well, I came for the hard skills, but when I left and look back on the experience, what I love is I now feel like I know everybody in Boston. I've got this unbelievable network. I've had access to 50 different companies. And I feel like I'm ready to just really do a great job in a company. And so we do a lot of soft skills work. Now, soft skills at Startup Institute, you can actually go to the website or just Google, if you Google Startup Institute 6 traits, you can get a free copy of the research. But basically, we went out to a couple hundred companies and said, tell us about people who you've hired who you wish you could clone. And tell us about your hiring mistakes. And we compared the two. And the big differentiator was soft skills. But it's not they were nice. It was the number one thing, the most mentioned skill that people talked about was they wanted employees who could operate in a really stressful, unstructured, unclear environment without getting paralyzed. And whenever I say that to people who are executives, they go, oh, it's so true. Like they don't want people who are saying, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do next. Like, is this okay now? What do you want me to do now? What do you want me to do? It's like, just do something. Just take a step. So you can teach that. We can teach that because we put people in very unstructured, unclear situations, and we have them work their way out of it, and they get mad and frustrated and all of that. But by the end of the time, they're able to be in those situations and say, okay, I've done this before. Other skills, people want people who are learners. So what they don't want is somebody who comes in, who's an expert, who's a know-it-all, who thinks they don't need help. They want people who are really clear about what they know and what they don't know, who can kind of take responsibility for their own learning and, help other people. So there are lots of categories of soft skills that turn out to be really, really important.
That's great. And there's also something about the difference between, because a lot of the people that come to Startup Institute are wanting jobs in growth companies, like you said. And I guess there's a difference between training or teaching somebody to be an entrepreneur, and a lot of people don't necessarily want to be an entrepreneur themselves, but actually enjoy working in that environment. Can you talk about that difference and how you see that as an opportunity or as a need in the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, the Gallup data says that 70% of people are disengaged in their jobs. Like, if you're not like that, most of you probably aren't like this, but you have friends who are like this. They're sitting in cubicles in those buildings out there, and they go on Facebook and They see their friends hanging out with free food, loving their jobs, and they can't believe it. They feel like they're alone, and yet most people are like that. Most people are saying, like, I don't know what happened, but I just don't love my job. And we're all working so hard. So I think at least now, in cities like Boston, very often what happens is somebody says, well, you know what you should do? You should start your own business, because being an entrepreneur is such a sexy thing now. I mean, look at Boston. There's so many resources for entrepreneurs. There are incubators and accelerators. Every college has an entrepreneurship program. Like, every person who's interested in entrepreneurship in the city of Boston knows how to write a business plan, even though I actually think that skill is overrated. And we have mentors, and we have venture people, and we have seminars, and we have conferences. But not everybody wants to be the founder. Like, lots of people are interested in working in startups or high growth companies, because it's all the stuff that I used to talk about tucking in the back of my own mind, right? You know, wanting to work with a bunch of people and build something and feel like it matters. And sometimes we hear people who are applying to Startup Institute will say things like, I just want to be obsessed with my job. Like, I want to work weekends. I want to be in a job where I'm working weekends because I want to, because I'm just so excited about what I'm doing. And there are lots of people who want to do that. So there are lots of people who are desperate to find work they love. And there are lots of companies that are desperate to find people who want to work weekends, you know, and want to do all of those other things. So I think Startup Institute's played a great role in the community, because we're very, very focused on the talent. And some of our students go to really, really early stage companies, and some of our students end up at, you know, an innovation lab of a much bigger company or whatever. So they might go to, you know, they might go to HubSpot, but they might also go to some 3-person startup, you know, three guys with baseball caps sitting in a basement eating ramen noodles, hoping that something works. And through the boot camp, people get exposure to all kinds of companies. So you start learning, oh, that, I'm interested in that kind of thing, I'm not interested in that. They learn how to read culture. They meet a lot of executives. They start thinking about where they feel like they would belong.
So let's talk a little bit about that. And this is kind of a segue to another topic, which is that also something you do? How do you're educating people who want to work with startups, but do you mentor startups or entrepreneurs? Maybe they approach you for advice if they want to start a company in marketing, or what's your experience in terms of mentoring? And a question attached to that is, what is the thing that you're hearing, or what is your most common advice you give to entrepreneurs that are starting their own companies? What is the most important thing they need to think about?
Well, if I'm meeting an entrepreneur, I don't do this through Startup Institute, but I've just been around long enough that I get lots of entrepreneurs calling me. I think there are 3 questions that I try to ask entrepreneurs. One is, how big is the problem that you're solving? You've got to be solving a big problem. So this is probably terrible because I'm such a champion of women entrepreneurs, but there are more women building shoe companies, and we're fine. We're fine, and that doesn't mean that you can't build. There's not some other great shoe company out there, but I would never, and I don't know why, a venture person, it would have to be like a miracle thing going on, but having another shoe company is not solving a big problem. So that would require some market data that says, here's a big unmet need. Category 2 is, how well does the solution address the problem? And figuring that out really requires some domain expertise. So if an entrepreneur comes to me and says, I got a cancer-curing drug, I go, that's a big problem. But I have absolutely no ability to help figure out whether what they're doing is actually going to cure cancer. But in some areas, I can actually say, that's a big problem, and that's kind of an interesting way to address it. Or you can refer them to somebody who can help evaluate that. And then the last bucket is, to what degree do you have a team that can really make this happen. I mean, if you've got the right problem and the right solution, do you have a team that can execute? So I usually tell people just to think about those things. And I would say that 50% of the time, probably more than 50% of the time, people will tell me what they're doing, and I either don't get it, or I think I've got it, but if you put me on tape and I read it back, the entrepreneur would say, oh my gosh, I told her my whole idea and she doesn't get it. I mean, I think where people really get tripped up is in articulating number one and number two. Here's the pain, and here's what we are doing to solve the pain. And I just think you got to get to the point where things are very, very simple, because people just don't get it. I know at Communispace, it was a big breakthrough for us. I came up with this term for Communispace. I used to call us a focus group on steroids. And when I would say that, people would laugh like they literally got it. And I would say, I mean, here's the thing. Why would you want 10 people sitting in a room for an hour when you could have hundreds of people available to you all the time? Now, my management team at the time didn't like focus group on steroids, because they're like, oh, don't say the F word, don't say the F word. Everybody hates focus groups. If they think we're doing focus groups, we'll never sell. But basically, I came up with that, and all of a sudden, people got it. You know, now it's easier to get it because everybody understands how the web works, how people could, you know, collaborate with each other, how you could use the internet to help brands really, really understand their consumers and their lives in depth. But when you're doing it, people don't get it, because hopefully you're hopefully people are just, you know, you're just too cutting edge. So I think that's a lot of it, is working on those first two. How can you just dumb down what you're doing? And don't say, you know, we're like Uber for, you know, cooking, if you're not like Uber for cooking, if people can't get what that would be, right? So just saying that you got to figure out a metaphor that really, really works, where people go, and makes a big difference.
You also talk about the third point, which is teams, and having been through the experience of Startup Institute, what do you recommend to entrepreneurs? What makes a great team?
Well, you know, in the early days, I think a great team is a bunch of utility players. I mean, what you need early on, one of my first hires was a guy named Brian Harold, and I had known him because we did a little bit of work together in a previous company. The guy could write code. He had great interpersonal skills, so he could talk to customers on the phone. His brother was a lawyer, and so Brian had learned some stuff from him. So he was the guy who was reviewing our contracts, and he made great coffee, and he had a great attitude. He'd go pick up the, I mean, you need somebody who will just do everything, because you can't afford to have somebody in every function. So your utility players are really, really critical. It's just too hard to hire specialists. As the company gets bigger, you need people who are really, really great, you know, in various functions. But early on, it's all about, can they do a lot of different stuff, and do you feel like these people can, you know, they share your values, you know, they want to have fun, and, you know, they kind of have this dream of building a great culture. So, you know, I think that's the people part. You know.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about Boston. You mentioned earlier on when you were describing that you have a lot of experience being around. After building your company and growing it and being now part of the education ecosystem for startups, how do you see Boston's boom in the entrepreneurial economy, and how do you see that in the next few years? Are you hopeful it'll sustain this level of growth over time? What gets you excited about Boston as a setting for startups in the coming future?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are a couple of things that are distinctive about Boston. I think the first is its intimacy. physical and otherwise. So Boston is pretty small. I mean, as you all know, you can kind of walk around the city and, you don't even have to use public transportation. See, Kenneth is leaving, and he better be coming back. Oh, yeah, he left his phone. It's hard to it's hard to sit in the front row. Now I just taught you. The other thing that's intimate about it is it's also the capital, right? So if you've been around here for a while, I mean, I knew Deval Patrick. I not only knew Deval Patrick, Deval was at my office in, early days when he was running for governor. There he was, like walking around, wanting to know what I was doing. Tom Menino is the reason why we moved to Fort Point Channel. He just said, Diane, you got to move into this building. It's going to be great. I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose all our employees. This place is dead. He's going, no, 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 no. I mean, that's unbelievable, right? Here I am, like one of many entrepreneurs, but so like the governor is here, the mayor is here, the policy is getting done here. You start meeting everybody. Most of the entrepreneurs are within walking distance of each other. And I think that means that there's community. And the result of that is I think we all have a shared experience. And I can't tell you how many times people would say to me, what can I do to be helpful? And hopefully people feel that I do that also, that I say, how can I be helpful to you? So I think that community is very, very unique. Everybody wants everybody else to be successful. And if you've been in Silicon Valley, for instance, it's not like that. It's super competitive. Like, my deal is bigger than yours. My product is bigger than yours. I mean, it's just a lot of, I'm cooler than you are. I think Boston is, I think the good and bad in Boston is that their passion here is for solving very, very big, tricky problems. So if you're trying to cure cancer, if you're trying to transform a business enterprise, if you're trying to make major, major changes to healthcare, if you're trying to really invent the future, that's the kind of stuff that's getting done here. We've never been good at like the shoe businesses. I think there are some really fabulous consumer tech companies here. I think but they're here. They've got friends here, and they've got a lot of support because it's sexy to do that. But I think it's a little harder. So I feel very proud of the kind of stuff, that gets built in Boston. And then, of course, the last thing I'd say is talent. I mean, they talk a lot about the brain drain in Boston, like people leaving, but look at what we start with. Like, there are 60 colleges and universities here. This city is just, it's rife with people in their 20s who are brilliant and skilled and dynamic and passionate, and it's just an embarrassment of riches. And sure, some of them leave, but we start with such a big number. I think the talent here is just unbelievable, and it's again, just special for that. So fun.
Great. I think that's a good segue to ask the present talent if they have any questions and open it up to our guests. So anybody has any questions for Diane?
I have one while we're thinking about questions. I just have to say this. Do you know what the most popular boy's name is of the past 2 weeks in the United States? Ash. Because of Pokemon.
Oh, wow.
So everybody's playing Pokemon Go, and all these people are naming their kids like I don't even play this game. Edie, something. Evil, Eevee, and Ash. Most popular names of the week. I know, it's weird. It's weird, but just so you know, Ash, you're going to be. All right, Winston, you have a question?
I do, but so I can talk to you anytime. So I mean, my question is going to be very simple. I know a lot of the things about Boston I think are true. It's the proximity to people, and proximity to talent, and actually the physical location and concentric nature of. But building networks and teams is not as easy. Right, even with that. So do you have any advice to people who are saying they want to build their personal team of people who help them think through problems, or the network of people who would do things together? And how do you make that chiropractic alignment of all the things that are here best around a particular company?
You know, it's funny. I was a late entrepreneur. I didn't really start Communispace till I was 44. So I didn't have trouble building a team because I just took I literally, you were asking me about teams before, I just took people who I had worked with before.
Yeah.
And I did that, and then I spent all of my time, like every time I would see people, I would say, Winston, tell me do you know any salespeople in the city of Boston? Like, who's the best salesperson in the city of Boston? And you'd go, well, you know, it's Ash. He'd go, and you go, but you can't hire him. He's like super, super happy in his job. And I'd say, well, I don't need to hire him, but can I meet him? Yeah. Then I'd go have coffee with Ash. I'd say, oh, I think you're amazing. Maybe someday we can work together. I mean, I would do that. I was constantly recruiting. So it helps to already have a network. Easier for everybody, easier to build your company where you know people than not. And then, you know, just recruiting all the time. I think one of the reasons that Startup Institute does well, though, is that we have a lot of companies that partner with us, which is not expensive, to be able to get access to talent. I mean, in Boston, Startup Institute has 800 alumni, all working in companies around here, most with really great technical skills and soft skills, and they all know each other. So when companies get connected to that network, you know, you get connected to one person, you also are connected to their 800 best friends. So it's like live LinkedIn. Somebody over here?
Oh, I thought you had.
Thank you. Dana, this is a question for you. And so you mentioned that you created a product that there was a buzz about it and people loved the product to begin with. And when you actually finally launched the product, nobody was like using it, right? So how did you find out a solution, or what did you do to figure out what are the things, or what are the reasons why they weren't using it, and what were your action plan at that point? I mean, if you can give us some insight on that, please.
Well, you know, we tried everything. I mean, I used to read, what I finally found out is that we were in the knowledge management space, which is really, I mean, just think about that. That was our industry, knowledge management. You know, once I knew what industry I was in, I knew I was doing something that wasn't mission critical. I mean, we'd call on people in companies who were like head of knowledge management. I'd think, oh my gosh, like talk about somebody who probably doesn't have very much budget. So I started learning that, you know, we stuck with it. I was feeling entrepreneurial. We had a little bit of cash. We had some great clients. We were more worried about it than the clients. I started reading knowledge management journals. They'd say, well, you know, people are starting to try to build some of these communities, and, you know, usually you can get like 1% of the people to participate. I think 1%, that's like 2 people a week. We were doing way better than that. It was hard, but you know, I don't know what we would have done were it not for a client saying that he had a better idea. So I really value that. I always used to say that I wasn't the founder, that our founder was Tom Brailsford from Hallmark. People would go, oh no, Diane, you know, look what you did with this idea. But it was a huge turning point for us. And Tom always valued that. You know, it's funny. Your tough times in your life and in your company build your character. And I think that what you do when you're having trouble, this is what I tell people now, you're having a rough time in your company, just say, someday. Someday. I mean, if you're lucky enough to figure it out, it's really great to have struggled. And so the whole struggle to figure out how things would work shaped what kind of company we became. It shaped our values. You know, people would come in, we'd have new employees every week. I'd tell the Hallmark story. And then as new things happen, you know, you create a story about your company. About 4 years ago, Tom Brailsford retired from Hallmark. And I told him to come to Boston and come to a staff meeting, and we'd sit and just hear the story from his perspective. So he decides to come. So Siobhan, who was my Ash, who came early on, She was head of client services. She writes a note to the entire Boston office, which is like 400 or 500 people. Tom Brailsford from Hallmark is coming tomorrow. Everybody wear purple, which is the Hallmark colors. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is like so weird. I come in the following day. The entire company is wearing purple. The software engineers are wearing purple. That whole team. And it was really unbelievable. Like, I could start crying right now. We had everybody in our cafeteria, which looks like Fenway Park, which is a whole other story. And Tom comes in, and he walks down the stairs, and the entire company got up in purple, this sea of purple, and stood up and just started clapping. And I just thought, wow, I mean, it was just such a how far we'd come moment. But I think people really wanted to honor him. So I think in any of these situations, when you're struggling, like, there are two possibilities when you're struggling. One is that it's not going to work. So, oh well, right? You'll do another. I mean, if you need to, you just do another. But what if the struggle is just chapter 1? What if someday you make it work? And then you can say, it wasn't always this easy. Like, we had, at Communispace, we had 3 near-death experiences. Now I wear that like it's a badge of courage. People go, wow, you had 3 times when you literally thought it was going to be all over. It's like, yeah. We thought we were going to be working at the Greek restaurant across the street from our offices. We just thought it was all over. One of our investors dropped out. He literally has his assistant call me. He didn't even have the guts to tell me. And he went off and he married Vanna White, like Wheel of Fortune, who turns the letters and everything. We're all like, shallow. We have pictures of her all over our, just... but all that stuff. So I think that's a lot of it. The way you get yourself through those tough times is to just envision that, like, maybe someday you'll figure it out, and the person who helps you figure it out will, figuratively walk down the stairs and get a standing ovation, and it might not be you. It might be just, some other person where, serendipity just showed up.
Thank you. One more question? Yeah.
Hey, thanks for coming back.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. So I currently am 1 year out of college. I'm working in a position that doesn't really pertain to anything I would be interested in if I were to leave. And although I'm learning a lot about things that I'm interested in now, in theory, I don't necessarily know a lot of people who have worked in this specific space before. Mm-hmm. So the question is 2 parts. First of all, how would you choose co-founders in the sense that, if I have not worked directly with them in this thing I'm interested in, would you go so far as choose from friends? Because from your experience, you chose from people who you directly worked with. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a different dynamic than maybe sorting out through personal connections, because you might not know as much about them professionally. Mm-hmm. And then the second part is, would you advise actually quitting my job and going off to work specifically in, sales or anything else that I'm interested in directly, to meet connections first before jumping off of, any ideas for a company?
Wow, that's like 10 questions. Okay.
I miscounted, sorry.
So let me try to net out some responses. Number 1, I think your 20s are about figuring out what you love and who you love. And if you can do one of those, by the time you're 30, you're crushing it. So I would say don't overthink it, because 10 years from now, what you're going to be doing doesn't exist now. So just learn. Don't worry about it. Life is long. We have so many chapters. And I promise you that I know I'm going to sound like your mother, but when you're my age, you won't even remember what you did in your 20s. You literally will not be able to remember it. So learn make mistakes, all that. If you want to start a company, most of the time, if you want to start a company, it's not rational. You have to do it. I would strongly suggest, if you want a co-founder, find somebody you know. Find somebody who you've worked with or who you really, really like. It's hard. It's hard to found a company with somebody who you don't know. Better to find somebody who you know and do like a prenup. Like say, here are our rules. Here are our ground rules. Here's what we're going to do if it's not working. So figure that all out up front so that when you start hating each other, you have a document that you can go to and you have an agreement that the minute things are shaky, you're going to actually have a conversation about it. If you don't want to found something right away, I'm a huge fan of learning how to sell. And the reason is if you look at a lot of companies, I mean, most of the people look at, take it out of the startup world. Look at law firms. Who are the people at the top? The rainmakers. Look at a consulting firm. Who are the people at the top? The rainmakers. Think about having a company and having the economy tank. What skills matter when the economy's bad? Sales, right? All of that. So it doesn't mean you have to love it, but learning how to have a conversation with someone who's never met you and who doesn't understand what your product is and has never heard of your company is a very high-level skill. And if you can do it, you'll always be able to work. And then all you have to do is, get yourself into a situation where you're selling something that you love. But it's a great background for being an entrepreneur if you're not ready to go yet.
All right, thank you.
And they never teach it to you in college.
So then what is the best way of learning how to sell?
I think there are 3 ways to learn how to sell. 1, go to a big company that has a great training program and learn. Like the company used to be IBM. Like if you wanted to get great sales skills, go to IBM, go to get into a training program and just learn that way. 2, go into a startup. Say you want to sell, say you don't know a lot, but you're happy to just get on the phone and dial for dollars. No one else ever wants to do that. Maybe somebody will hire you and you learn through the school of hard knocks because you'll pick up the phone and people will be hanging up on you right and left and you build thick skin. You start learning what works. Or you could do a thing like, the 3rd is you can go to a place like Startup Institute and learn the skill that way. My gosh, I'm falling apart here. So you can actually learn that way. And I think some of that is just, it's a personality thing. You're the kind of person who really needs to have more structure, or can you just kind of jump in the deep end? If you're already in a company and you're not in a sales job, it's also fun to just, get to know the people who are in sales, see if you can go on a call with them, see if you can shadow them. Your manager asks you what you want to be when you grow up, say, I don't know, but I'd maybe be interested in trying out sales. I mean, it's not for everybody, but if it sounds interesting, it's a really, really great thing to be able to do. I would never have been able to build my company without sales skills, and I'm very grateful because early in my career, I was working for a sales training company. So I've had tons of sales training. I sold sales training, which is the most unbelievable thing to sell, because when you're selling sales training, the customer says, oh, really? So like if I buy your program, my people are going to sell the way you do? I mean, that's what they think. So the bar is very high. And, it's great to be able to do that, but you have to have the gene. Like for me, getting a contract signed, walking to my CFO and going, there you go. I mean, I just get a thrill out of that. I still do. I love the whole thing. Not everybody's like that.
Thank you so much for coming, and it was great.